Hello all. So today after so many questions, I finally decided that whatever I know about APIs in Business Central, we'll talk about it in this series. Sorry for the delay for whosoever have requested this content, and I'll try my best to share the knowledge that I have. If I'm wrong somewhere, please mention that into the comment section of these videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to add them into comments also. At the end of this series, I'll try to cover all the questions that you guys have. So what we are going to talk about today is not about APIs and Business Central. Let's go back a step back and try to understand what is an API. And I'll try to explain it in a layman's language so that we are pretty much clear once we start talking about Business Central that what is an API and what we should be doing as developers and so on and so forth. So let's get started. So let's come to the first area, which is what is the definition of an API. So when you start searching on web, Wikipedia and other stuff, you find that API stands for an application programming interface. An interface, what's an interface? Interface is which allows you to connect, and it's a programming interface. But an API is a connection between computers and computers, not between humans and computers. So if there is a situation where two computers or servers, for that say, need to interact between them to share some info or to get some info or to write some info, that's where your API comes into the picture, because that's is the engine which let that communication happen. So it's an interface which offers you a service to service or software to software interactions. So it is not for an end user connecting to a server because that's already there. But if for some reasons there is a need to connect between servers, that's where API comes into picture. Think about some examples where you have seen some API. Have you bought something from your famous website that you like to buy stuff from? Once you place your order, does it show you an option to share this on a social media platform? Let's say on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever you have ordered. At that point, what you are doing is you are connecting from that website to Twitter or to Facebook using an API. It's not it's not asking you to go to another browser, copy a link, and then paste it there. You just need to click a button, and if you are authenticated, if you are logged into that application where you want to share it, it just creates a post for you and let you publish it. Let's understand it from another very common example. I'm pretty sure that everyone who is watching this would have booked a flight. So you are a user who would like to book a flight. Technically, you can go to the airline website and book a flight. But most of us don't do that because we would like to see what options we have. And rather than spending hours into going into these different airline providers, we would like a way to handle it easily. So what you do, you log in to a travel booking website, and based on different region, you might have different website which let you book your flights from them. Now what happens in those websites, typically when a user interacts with it, there's a typical form where it says from where you are traveling, what is your destination, and on which date you would like to fly. There might be other options, what class you would like to fly, are you flexible on your dates and all. But the crux is that they want to know from where you are flying, to which destination you are flying, and on which date you would like to fly. Once you key in this info data, there's a typically a button called submit. Once you hit submit, think about what happens. It does not have the data within itself because it's not a airline website. It somehow goes to these airline websites and checks based on your filter parameters, which is from, to, and date, to see what options they have, and then bring that data back in and show it to you. Airline one will say, let's say, I don't have any flights, or I have flights, but they are already booked. So that data will not come back. Airline 2 will say, yeah, I have flights with this price, and that data will come back in, and so on and so forth, different airline websites. So what you do, what you see at the end of it, once you click on submit, that you see a list of flights that are going on that date and time from to and from to that destination, and what is the price of it. Now, the interaction between this website, which is your travel booking website, and to these airline website is happening via APIs. An API sends a request to these airline website and says, okay, whatever the user is requesting on my website is asking for this date, this to and from destination, and would like to know what options you have. And then these airline website via API sends that data back to this. So as an end user, you don't have to worry about the complexity that's happening in this side of the equation. And then there is another complexity, which we'll talk in a while. But you get a variety of options available and you are able to choose your flights. And then next step, you choose one of these three flights. It gives you option for booking. Once it books it, that information again flows. Let's say if I'm booking on airline 3, and it goes back to the airline web 3 API and says, okay, this seat is booked because one of the user from my side have paid for it. So this will be reserved. So next time when the any other travel website requests for the same to and from destination, this will give the number of seats as -1, because as in whatever the total count -1, because the one user have booked it. Now let's understand, when you talk about API, there comes the discussion about an endpoint. What is an endpoint? An endpoint is one end of communication channel, as simple as that. Um, when you think about APIs, as you are talking about it, APIs give you different kind of information from the system, and those different kind of information are delivered from different endpoints. So let me give you an example. A Google API, let's say, and I'm just making it up. I'm I'm sure it should be correct. A Google gives you an option to search. Google also gives you an option to Gmail, accessing the email. There are other services from Google, and all these are services are provided by Google at a specific endpoint. It does not happen that you do a google.com and it pops up a gmail.com, right? So there's a specific endpoint that hitting. Or maybe let's make it very simple. When you search something on Google, what you are giving it is, I would like to get this data from your search engine. So then it is trying to search that data. So that kind of becomes your endpoint. So an API gives you so many endpoints based on the the endpoint developer or the company who is publishing those endpoints, to see what is allowed from my API. So consider API as a layer somewhere, and then this API allows you to interact or give you different communication message. Like in the case of airline, which we were discussing earlier, there is an endpoint which gives the availability based on from, to, and date. There will be an endpoint which will give a cancellation facility with different parameters. There will be an endpoint which will give a reservation facility based on different inputs, and so on and so forth. So an endpoint is which gives an communication channel to the API. I will say that all looks good, but how does that all communication happens? Because there are different APIs available, as you're saying, and I as a user don't know what I need to call from. And that's where it's time to see some of the APIs that are publicly available. And there are so many of them. So I'll just cover some of those. There's this website called newsapi.org. This API gives you the latest worldwide news with code. So anytime a company decides the API, they also have to document it. So you'll not find an API available, public API, without any documentation. all the APIs that are available publicly will have documentation. Now, you'll always find this documentation section I was saying, and it gives you all the detail, all the endpoints. So if you see, the endpoint are everything, which gives you article published over 8,000 different sources in last 5 years. Top headings, it's another endpoint, which only returns you the breaking news headlines based on countries, categories, and all. And then there is a minor endpoint for source, where you can apply different parameters. The documentation will give you everything. Like if you want to get everything, what you need to pass. You need to pass an API key, which is needed in this case for authentication. And you need to do something like this when you want to get data from this. And this will be a sample response for you. So now you know what kind of inputs you need to give, which is this, what kind of responses you will get. And if you come down, it'll also tell you other each and every API call that you can make and what happens if there is an error. It gives you a status error and then it tells you in a message what the error is. Now this definition will surely differentiate from other APIs that you'll see, but anytime a, a a company or a server decide that they want to go public with their APIs, they surely will publish their documentation about everything that's needed to access their APIs. Now let's look at the other one. There's a free weather API. And you, as we were showing, you can always see the docs. And you can see how you can do call the APIs from the API website. It'll give you all the detail. These are the base URL, which is the common for everything. And then these are your endpoints, current weather, forecast, search, history. And as you keep going in, you'll find all the parameters that are needed. What are they optional? Are they mandatory? What country code or language code you need? Air quality, alerts, all these history API. Everything will have its own documentation, complete documentation. That's kind of a mandate when an API is being published. This is a random user generator for some testing, and they will also have a documentation. How to use. This is an example. How you get it. This kind of results you get it. If you have an error, you get something like this. If you want multiple users, then do this. If you want a specific gender, then do this. So on and so forth. Everybody has seen COVID-19. Indian government has an website where you can use that to get the API for Covin app, which is one of the app that, which is the only app that's needed to register yourself for vaccination in India. And they have an API. Do you want to download your vaccine certificate? Then there's an API. And then these are the parameters, and this is the reply that you'll get out of it. Uh, and then there are others like public APIs, user authentication API, metadata API, appointment. So if you have to appoint, get appointment, you can do it with the API call directly. So what I'm trying to say, and the aviation, in the same way, it gives you, this API side gives you flight tracker API, schedule API, and things like that. What I'm trying to explain with all this is two things. One, API is not specific to Business Central. It's a very common interface which is available. The other very common thing is anybody who tries to expose an API will always write a proper documentation of how it need to be called and what parameters it need, what kind of errors I'll give, what kind of output I'll give, and all that. And there is a reason behind it, which we'll talk in a while. And when you're talking about all this, let's quickly look into the Business Central. Business Central also have in their documentation all the APIs listed and all the documentation listed for those API. So if you want to get accounts, how you do that, and what kind of properties it need, how it will look like, and so on and so forth. So if you want to get a contact, how you get that. You access this, you can do it: get contact, delete contact, post contact, and patch contact. We'll come to it in a while or in the next video going forward. But it gives you all the documentation that's needed to utilize or consume Business Central APIs. So what an API will provide when you think about Business Central? An gateway to the external system to interact with Business Central. Okay, now we have understood most of the terms. Let's go ahead and just summarize it before we end it. So an end user, which interacts via a computer or a mobile device, and for some reason it needs to interact with an API to get some details. So it'll make a request, the API will send a response. But behind the scene, API is again connected to a database and web server where the data is actually hosted. Now, before I end this, I want to make something very clear, which is that who decides what goes out and what comes in is internal. Like in case of Business Central, it's either Microsoft or it's either partner or ISVs. They will define the definition of API, as in what this API can do. Is it only to get some details from Business Central out? Let's say I want to expose an API which just allows any external system to read all the customers in Business Central. I can define that as a partner, or Microsoft can define it, or an ISV. Or would I like my API to read as well as modify the existing customer that in Business Central? Or will I allow delete and so on and so forth, other commands? If I allow, then what parameters I need? What kind of authentication I need? That is majorly defined by Microsoft, which is OAuth in case of Business Central. So if anybody is interacting with my API, will need to use OAuth if they are on Business Central SaaS, and username web service key if they are on-prem. What kind of interaction they can do with Business Central? That's also is defined by any partner within the ecosystem, which is Microsoft, ISV, or NAV, or Business Central partner. Can they, let's say, post a sales order? Can they create an invoice? Can they post journal? All these is all that defined in API. It keeps the implementation hidden so that the end user, or not even the system, knows how that data is being processed internally. Because it's just a gateway which tells you that, okay, I'm exposing these methods or these fields based on these kind of parameter if provided. Whatever I'll do inside it, it's with me. So when you, let's say, take an example, if you pass records into a customer table, will I just create customer, or will I use that info to create customers, their default dimensions, and their bank account? You don't know it because that implementation is hidden behind the scenes. So when you think about API from Business Central, the first part is that you are responsible for what kind of data you are exposing to rest of the world and what format it is. The external system does not know anything about API, and that's where your API documentation comes into a picture, where you tell them what kind of parameters you need, what kind of authentication you need, what happens if there is an error, what happens if there is a success based on the parameters that you have passed. That all you have to define, and then and only then using those APIs an external entity can interact with Business Central data. So hope that gives you a background of what an API typically is. Going forward in this series, we'll surely talk about both the situation, how you create a new API, um, how you expose those APIs, and if needed, how you consume those APIs, and what are the different type of HTTP methods that are there. Can you consume non-business central APIs in your business central code using AL? We'll see that going forward. So if you are here and still here, then if you have any questions in your mind, drop them into the comment box. As I said, I'll try to answer them at the end of this series. Um, If you learn something new, do share this video with your friends. And if you like the content, then please hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. It helps us to understand how we are doing. Have a safe day and have a great day. And I'll come back with another video sooner than later. Thank you.